Shmuel Yosef Agnon was a Nobel Prize laureate writer and was one of the central figures of modern Hebrew fiction. In Hebrew, he is known by the acronym Shai Agnon. In English, his works are published under the name Shai Agnon. Agnon was born in Polish Galicia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and later immigrated to Mandatory Palestine, and died in Jerusalem, Israel. His works deal with the conflict between the traditional Jewish life and language and the modern world. They also attempt to recapture the fading traditions of the European shtetl. In a wider context, he also contributed to broadening the characteristic conception of the narrator's role in literature. Agnon shared the Nobel Prize with the poet Nelly Sachs in 1966. Biography. Shmuel Yosef Agnon was born in Buchach, Polish Galicia, now Buchach, Ukraine. Officially, his date of birth on the Hebrew calendar was 18 Av 5648, but he always said his birthday was on the Jewish fast day of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. His father, Shalom Mordecai Halevi, was ordained as a rabbi, but worked in the fur trade, and had many connections among the Hasidim. His mother's side had ties to the Mitnagdim. He did not attend school and was schooled by his parents. In addition to studying Jewish texts, Agnon studied writings at the Haskalah, and was also tutored in German. At the age of 8, he began to write in Hebrew and Yiddish. At the age of 15, he published his first poem, a Yiddish poem about the Kabbalist Joseph de la Reina. He continued to write poems and stories in Hebrew and Yiddish, which were published in Galicia. Literary career. In 1908, he moved to Jaffa in Ottoman Palestine. The first story he published was Agonot, which appeared that same year in the journal Har-Bach-Otoma. He used the pen name Agnon, derived from the title of the story, which he adopted as his official surname in 1924. In 1910, Forsaken Wives was translated into German. In 1912, at the urging of Joseph Heimbrenner, he published a novella, V'Yakov Lemashur. In 1913, Agnon moved to Germany, where he met Esther Marx. They married in 1920 and had 2 children. In Germany he lived in Berlin and Bad Homburg vor der Hohe. Salman Shokin, a businessman and later also publisher, became his literary patron and freed him from financial worries. From 1931 on, his work was published by Shokin Books, and his short stories appeared regularly in the newspaper Haaretz, also owned by the Shokin family. In Germany, he continued to write short stories and collaborated with Martin Buber on an anthology of Hasidic stories. Many of his early books appeared in Buber's Jüdischer Verlag. The mostly assimilated, secular German Jews, Buber and Franz Rosenzweig among them, considered Agnon to be a legitimate relic, being a religious man, familiar with Jewish scripture. Gershom's column called him the Jew's Jew. In 1924, a fire broke out in his home, destroying his manuscripts and rare book collection. This traumatic event crops up occasionally in his stories. Later that year, Agnon returned to Palestine and settled with his family in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Talpiot. In 1929, his library was destroyed again during anti-Jewish riots. When his novel Hachner's Arkala appeared in 1931 to great critical acclaim, Agnon's place in Hebrew literature was assured. In 1935, he published Sipur Pashat, a novella set in Buchach at the end of the 19th century. Another novel, Tmol Shilshom, set in Eretz Yisrael of the early 20th century, appeared in 1945. Literary themes and influences. Agnon's writing has been the subject of extensive academic research. Many leading scholars of Hebrew literature have published books and papers on his work, among them Baruch Kurzweil, Dov Sadin, Nitzav Ben Dov, Dan Moron, and Dan Laor. Agnon writes about Jewish life, but with his own unique perspective and special touch. In his Nobel acceptance speech, Agnon claimed, "Some see in my books the influences of authors whose names, in my ignorance, I have not even heard, while others see the influences of poets whose names I have heard but whose writings I have not read." Quote. He went on to detail that his primary influences were the stories of the Bible. Agnon acknowledged that he was also influenced by German literature and culture, and European literature in general, which he read in German translation. A collection of essays on this subject, edited in part by Hillel Weiss, with contributions from Israeli and German scholars, was published in 2010. Agnon and Germany: The Presence of the German World in the Writings of Shai Agnon. The budding Hebrew literature also influenced his works, notably that of his friend, Yosef Agnon. In Germany, Agnon also spent time with the Hebraists Hamnam and Bialakan Afad Ham. The communities he passed through in his life are reflected in his works. Galicia, in the books The Bridal Canopy, A City and the Fullness Thereof, A Simple Story, and A Guest for the Night. Germany, in the stories Fernheim, Thus Far and Between Two Cities. Jaffa, in the stories Oath of Allegiance, Tmol Shilsham, and The Dune. Jerusalem, Tehillah, Tmol Shilsham, Ida ve Inam, and Shira. Nubza Ben Dov writes about Agnon's use of elusiveness, free association and imaginative dream sequences, and discusses how seemingly inconsequential events and thoughts determine the lives of his characters. Some of Agnon's works, such as The Bridal Canopy, and The Crooked Shall Be Made Straight, and The Doctor's Divorce, have been adapted for theatre. A play based on Agnon's letters to his wife, Esther Lynn Yakarati, was performed at the Khan Theatre in Jerusalem. Language. Agnon's writing often used words and phrases that differed from what would become established modern Hebrew. His distinct language is based on traditional Jewish sources, such as the Torah and the Prophets, Midrashic literature, the Mishnah, and other rabbinic literature. Some examples include Bet Kahava for modern Bet Cafe, Beta Yadayim from modern Kfafot, Jatzta rather than the modern conjugation Yatzara. Rotef meaning soup in place of modern marek. Bar-Ilan University has made a computerized concordance of his works in order to study his language. Awards and critical acclaim. Agnon was twice awarded the Bialik Prize for Literature. He was also twice awarded the Israel Prize for Literature. In 1966, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his profoundly characteristic narrative art with motifs from the life of the Jewish people. The prize was shared with German Jewish author Nelly Sachs. In his speech at the award ceremony, Agnon introduced himself in Hebrew. As a result of the historic catastrophe in which Titus of Rome destroyed Jerusalem and Israel was exiled from its land, I was born in one of the cities of the exile. But always I regarded myself as one who was born in Jerusalem. In later years, Agnon's fame was such that when he complained to the municipality that traffic noise near his home was disturbing his work, the city closed the street to cars and posted a sign that read, "No entry to all vehicles, writer at work." Death and legacy. Agnon died in Jerusalem on February 17, 1970. His daughter, Emunah Yaron, has continued to publish his work posthumously. Agnon's archive was transferred by the family to the National Library in Jerusalem. His home in Talpiot, built in 1931 in the Bauhaus style, was turned into a museum. Beit Agnon. The study where he wrote many of his works was preserved intact. Agnon's image with a list of his works and his Nobel Prize acceptance speech appeared on the 50-shekel bill, second series, in circulation from 1985 to 2014. The main street in Jerusalem's Givat Aronim neighborhood is called Dero Shai Agnon, and a synagogue in Talpiot, a few blocks from his home, is named after him. Agnon is also memorialized in Buchach, now in Ukraine, where he was born. There is an extensive exhibition in the Historical Museum in Buchach, and, just a few yards away, a bust of Agnon is mounted on a pedestal in a plaza across the street from the house where he lived. The house itself is preserved and marked as the home where Agnon lived from birth till the age of 19. The street that runs in front of the house is named Agnon Street. Agnotherapy is a method developed in Israel to help elderly people express the feelings. Beit Agnon. After Agnon's death, the former mayor of Jerusalem, Mordecai Shalom, initiated the opening of his home to the public. In the early 1980s, the kitchen and family dining room were turned into a lecture and conference hall, and literary and cultural evenings were held there. In 2005, the Agnon House Association in Jerusalem renovated the building, which reopened in January 2009. The house was designed by the German Jewish architect Fritz Korenberg, who was also his neighbor. Published works, novels and novellas: The Bridal Canopy, translated from Hackney's Arcala, an epic describing Galician Judaism at the start of the 19th century. The story of a poor but devout Galician Jew, Reb Yudel, who wanders the countryside with his companion, Nuta, during the early 19th century, in search of bridegrooms for his 3 daughters. In the Heart of the Seas, a story of a journey to the land of Israel, translated from Biography, a short novel about a group of 10 men who travel from Eastern Europe to Jerusalem. A Simple Story, translated from Sipur Pashat, a short novel about a young man, his search for a bride, and the lessons of marriage. A Guest for the Night, translated from Oreah Notalalin, a novel about the decline of Eastern European Jewry. The narrator visits his old hometown and discovers that great changes have occurred since World War I. Betrothed, translated from Shavuot Emunim, a short novel, Only Yesterday, translated from Temol Shilshom, an epic novel set in the Second Aliyu period. It follows the story of the narrator from Galicia to Jaffa to Jerusalem, sometimes translated as Those Were the Days. Edo and Anam, a short novel, to this day, translated from Adhena, a tale of a young writer stranded in Berlin during World War I. Shira, a novel set in Jerusalem in the 1930s and 1940s. Manfred Herbst, a middle-aged professor suffering from boredom, spends his days prowling the streets searching for Shira, the beguiling nurse he met when his wife was giving birth to the 3rd child. Against the background of 1930s Jerusalem, Herbst wages war against the encroachment of age. Short Stories of Such and of Such, a collection of stories, including And the Crooked Shall Be Made Straight, Forsaken Wives, and Belevav Yamim, from 1933. At the Handles of the Lock, a collection of love stories, including Bidme Yomea, a simple story, and The Dune, Near and Apparent, a collection of stories, including The Two Sages Who Were in Our City, Between Two Cities, The Lady and the Peddler, the collection The Book of Deeds, the satire chapters of the National Manual, and Introduction to the Kaddish, after the funerals of those murdered in the land of Israel. Thus Far, a collection of stories, including Thus Far, Prayer, Oath of Allegiance, The Garment, Fernheim, and Ida v. Inam. The Fire and the Wood, a collection of stories including Hasidic tales, a semi-fictional account of Agnon's family history and other stories. Tale of the Goat, English translations, Forever, translated and commentary by Yehud Salu, Create Space, 2014. A Simple Story, revised edition, translated by Hillel Hulkin, The Toby Press, 2014. Shira, revised edition of Shai Agnon's final novel, The Toby Press, 2014. Two Tales, Betrothed Anam, Edo and Anam, contains 2 short novellas. 21 Stories, a collection of translated stories from the Book of Deeds and elsewhere. Israeli Stories, ed. Joel Blogger, contains the stories Tehillah and Forevermore. New Writing in Israel, ed. Ezra Spice-Handler and Curtis Hansen, contains the story Wartime in Leipzig, an excerpt from In Mr. Lublin's Store, A Dwelling Place of My People, contains 16 short stories about the Hasidim of Poland, from the Hebrew volume These and Those, Jaffa, Bell of the Seas, selections from the works of Shai Agnon. Tehillah, Israel Argosy, trans. By Walter Lever, Jerusalem Post Press, Jerusalem, 1956. Anthologies Days of War, a book of customs, interpretations, and legends for the Jewish days of mercy and forgiveness, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the days between. Present at Sinai, the Giving of the Law, an anthology for the festival of Shavuot. Posthumous publications Ayah, a collection of stories and legends about Shai Agnon's hometown. In Mr. Lublin's shop, set in Germany of the First World War. Within the Wall, a collection of 4 stories. From Myself to Myself, a collection of essays and speeches. Introductions, stories, book, writer and story, stories about writers and books from the Jewish sources. The Beams of Our House, 2 stories. The first about a Jewish family in Galicia, the second about the history of Agnon's family. Estelin Yakarati, letters from Agnon to his wife. A shroud of stories. The correspondence between Shai Agnon and S. Sharkin, letters between Agnon and his publisher. Agnon's Aleph-Bet Poems, a children's guide to the Hebrew alphabet. A book that was lost. 35 stories. In 1977 the Hebrew University published Yiddish Works, a collection of stories and poems that Agnon wrote in Yiddish during 1903 to 1906. Bibliography.